Recording started.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you to everyone for joining us for this session of Meeting the Needs of Diverse Adult Learners. I'm Betsy Stout-Morrell. I'm glad to be here presenting to you today. If you'll take a look on the screen, the welcome to quick review is there with Elluminate. In case you're not familiar, we're just going to run down that quickly. You'll see that the blue arrow here shows you where to raise your hand in case you have a question. The orange shows you where you can let me know if you need anything, if you agree or disagree, or if you need me to answer a question. This is an important one here, the yellow. Make sure you know how to do those polling answers, because there's a couple of times, not many, but a few I'm going to ask you to do that. When you get ready to leave, you'll use the goodbye. If you need to let me know something and you don't have the mic, just feel free to type it in the chat area, and I'll be glad to respond either out loud or in typing. And also, if you can't hear me, you can adjust the microphone on the buttons down at the very bottom. Okay, let's get started. Does anyone have any questions about Elluminate before I begin? All right. I don't see any hands raised, so we're going to go on. Let's take a few minutes just to find out who we are in the audience and get to know each other a little bit. Let's answer this first question. I am. What I want you to do is look down this list and see if one of these describes you. Then go to the polling area, which is right here, and pick A, B, C, or D. Go ahead and do that now. Thanks, Grace. Okay, Jacqueline, go to the area just right here. This is where I want you to pick A, B, C, or D. Okay? Everybody, go right in here. There you go. I see some more A's and B's coming up. Let's take a look at who we are. All right. David and Diana, if you'd like to participate, that's fine. If not, we're ready to move on. Let's take one final look at who we are. So we've got a lot of volunteers in our audience. And a lot of other. We'll have to figure out who you are along the way. Okay, let's move along to our next question. I want to know, let's do the first one. How much do you know, grade yourself A, B, C, or D, and here again, use those choices right here, to tell me how much you know about second language learners. Just change your answer. Oh. Okay, let's take a look. Okay, we've got some people that do have good knowledge of second language learners and others who need a little bit, so we'll work on that. And hopefully during the session here today, you'll be able to get to know some more things that will help you with that. Okay, let's go to our second question. How much do you know about adults with learning disabilities? If you go here and select another answer, it'll change automatically for you. Okay, let's take a look and see who we are. So we've got some that have a knowledge of learning disabilities, so maybe we can have a few ideas of how to meet the needs of those diverse learners. Okay, and now let's go for our last question, then we'll be ready to get into the meat of the presentation, and hopefully everybody's with us now. Okay, go back into your choices there. Tell me, how long have you been in literacy programs, involved in literacy programs? Oh, we've got a lot, or between 1 and 5 years, so fairly new. Looks good. All right, thank you for doing that. Now I've got a general sense of who we are, and let's move on. Get ready to go into the presentation. Okay, first of all, let's talk about adult learners. Okay. One thing that's important to know is there are a lot of individuals who have learning preferences. Now, when we say learning preferences, what do we mean by that? Feel free to use the chat area and type in some ideas of what you think learning preferences are. Just got an idea. These are things that all of us have. How students learn? Yes. But think about ways, learning styles, you're absolutely right. How about just whether, yes, ways of learning, but give me some specific, there you go, Lee, visual learners. Some people prefer to learn visually. How about whether you like to learn at home or whether you like to learn in a group? Where you like to sit, right, Jacqueline? Auditory learners. They like to hear the lecture. Some people like the visual to see. You're right, Jenny, there you go. Visual, touching, motion, kinesthetic learners. These are preferences. The thing about learning preferences is they don't necessarily keep a person from learning, but a person whose learning preferences are met learns better. And so when we're teaching, if we become very aware of what learners' preferences are, and we can meet those preferences by teaching in a variety of modalities in different ways. We can say the directions out loud while we're also giving them a written copy. We can ask them to highlight that copy if they need to move it while they're learning. We can do a lot of things to meet their learning preferences. So now let's go down and talk about learning difficulties. Okay. So what is the difference between a learning preference and a learning difficulty? Anybody got any ideas on that? How about where we have interpersonal differences? Say, for example, we could have an adult learner who is pretty good at math, but can't do the reading part. Where they have difficulties in one area, they're very verbally expressive. They can speak and talk, but yet when you ask them to write those ideas on a page, there's where they become a difficulty. So those learning difficulties also depend on, like I said, circumstances or specific tasks. For example, a person can do one thing very well, but can't do another. Now, sometimes some teachers seem to think if a person can do math, then they should be able to do reading or writing. And we have to make sure we know that those interpersonal differences, we can't have expectations for learners in different areas when they have, expect them to do everything on the same level, just like us. Okay. So now let's go down. Oh, thank you, Jenny. Now let's go down to this biggie right here, learning disabilities. Now, what are some specific learning disabilities that you know? We often hear a lot of words, about learning disabilities. So, what are some specific learning disabilities? Go ahead and write those down. Type them into the chat area. Dyslexia, yes. Perfect, perfect. And let's look at something. Let's take dyslexia, which is a reading disability. But let's look at it, okay, from a learning preference standpoint, a learning difficulty standpoint, and a learning disability standpoint. Say you have a person who comes into you for tutoring or who wants help, and they say, I can't read very well. When you actually start working with that student, you find out, well, he can read some things, but he can't read others. So he might have a learning difficulty in that he doesn't have a big enough vocabulary. He also might have a learning preference that he prefers to read things that are printed instead of in cursive writing, or maybe he prefers to read things on paper instead of on screen. That does not mean that he has a learning disability. He has dyslexia. It just means that he may think he has a learning disability, or others may think that person has a learning disability, but he really doesn't. Now, I'm going to say something here that can be pretty controversial, so hold on, don't panic. When we're working with adults in the majority of our literacy programs, whether the person has a learning disability, a learning difficulty, or a learning preference really doesn't matter. Hold on, don't panic yet. I don't mean it's not important. What I mean is, if we are teaching well with good, specific, explicit directions, we have strategies, and we understand how to make help an adult learner to be self-determining, whether they actually have a learning disability, a documented, or whether it goes undocumented, a learning difficulty, or a learning preference, we can still improve that adult's learning, and that's the key right there. Okay, questions about that? Let's move on then and look at a few more points about that. Okay, I want you to take a moment and look at these 6 consensus statements. Just take one quick minute. Now let's go through these. We don't need to spend a lot of time on the majority of them because I think you pretty well, So make sure if you disagree with me, though, I want you to make sure you raise your hand. Let's look at number 1. There's a concept of LD is valid and is supported by strong converging evidence. Some people out there actually do believe that learning disabilities are a social construct, but they really don't. There really is no such thing as a learning disability. It's just that there are different kinds of learners. But there are studies and convergent evidence that shows there are specific learning disabilities. Okay? And we've got evidence to prove that. Agree or disagree? If you don't agree, raise your hand and let's talk about it. I don't see any hands up, so I'm going to move on to number 2. Number 2, they're neurologically based. Yes, learning disabilities and also preferences and also difficulties can occur neurologically. They are just connections in the brain, and they are intrinsic to a specific individual about how they learn and what they can or can't learn, or what's difficult for them to learn, or what takes more time for them to learn. If you disagree with number 2, raise your hand and we'll talk about it. I don't see any hands up, so I'm moving on to 3. Individuals with LD show intra-individual differences in skills and abilities. Now, there's that tricky one, where you have that maybe classroom teacher who says, well, Bob, I see you do pretty well in social studies because you're really interested in history, but you don't do so well in math. I think if you tried as hard in math as you did in social studies, you wouldn't have any problems in math. When that's just not the way it is. We have differences internally that make us better able to do one thing than another. And just because we can, it does not mean we don't have a learning disability. That actually shows we have a learning disability. If you disagree with that one, raise your hand now or forever hold your peace. Okay, let's take a look at number 4. Here's another biggie. LD persists across the lifespan. I wonder how many times students who are adult learners who are in front of us now heard while they were in school, well, I hope you'll grow out of this when you become more mature. We think that a learning problem has to do with effort. And though sometimes it may, that's not always the case. But the majority of us, do we outgrow our learning difficulties, our learning disabilities, our learning preferences? Nope, not really. They truly do occur across the lifespan. Absolutely, Jenny, you're right on there. Sometimes it appears that an adult has outgrown that learning problem because they have learned excellent compensatory activities. They've learned how to find others who help them accomplish what they need to accomplish, and so it appears that they no longer have that learning problem, when that's really not the case. Okay. If you disagree with number 4, because we're getting consensus here, raise your hand. Now let's look at number 5. Do you think learning disabilities can occur in combination with other disabilities? Yes, absolutely, they sure can. Now, here's the thing. If a student has, or an adult learner has a disability in another area, say for example, they have cerebral palsy, or they have vision impairment, or they have hearing impairment. Does that mean that the student will have a learning disability because of that other confounding condition? Absolutely no. No. Learning disabilities are not caused by the other condition. The other condition is comorbid, or at the same time, concomitant. But having another, for example, let's think about Helen Keller. Helen Keller had vision impairment, hearing impairment, she had multiple impairments. But did she have a learning disability? No. Once she got the right kind of instruction to meet her learning preference, to meet her learning difficulties, because having vision impairment and hearing impairment definitely was a difficulty, to meet the needs of that other disability, she was able to learn. And not only to be able to learn, became a world-renowned author and a role model for a lot of disabled people. Okay, now let's get to that last one. Are learning disabilities evident in all populations, all cultures, language, economic groups? If you think yes, hit A. If you think no, hit B right now. Make your choices. A or B, yes or no. I see those A's coming up. Absolutely. Sometimes we have certain populations overrepresented in our special education courses and classrooms, and so we think that maybe certain populations have more LDs than others, but that's really not the case. And here's another biggie. Why would they be more minorities in a special education classroom? When we think about that, it could be a variety of factors. Everything from that person not having a bilingual testing assessor, and so it is not that the student has a learning disability, but that he or she has not been appropriately tested by a person in their own native language. So there is evidence that there are equal representation. Now, these are the 6 consensus statements for agreeing that we can meet the needs of students with learning disabilities, learning difficulties, or learning preferences if we all agree on these 6 consensus statements. Okay. Any questions? Raise your hand. All right, let's move on. So, if an adult has trouble learning English, does that mean that he or she has a learning disability? Nope, not necessarily. It could be that they are not fluent in their native language, and so then we are confounding that issue by asking them to learn a second language. And here's another interesting fact. Sometimes we have an adult who is very fluent, can read, write, speak very well in their native language, but when they're trying to learn the English language, because it is so drastically different from the structure, the pronunciation, the everything, the writing from their own language, that they actually struggle to learn English, and they sometimes appear to have a learning disability, but it really is not. Now, here's that big statement. Remember, if we have good teaching, good instruction, good strategies, explicit instruction, whether the adult learner who's standing in front of us wanting to become more proficient in literacy skills, if we are meeting their needs by having excellent teaching, then it doesn't matter that they have whether they have a diagnosed learning disability or not. Here again, I'm not saying it's not important. I'm saying we can still meet their needs and we can still improve their learning. We don't have to focus on getting them tested, but on meeting their needs to improve their learning. So, how do we do that? Let's get started. It used to be that learning disabilities were diagnosed by that old adage about the IQ and discrepancy right here. You know, the IQ said that it was average or above average learner, but they were low in certain academic areas, and so they had a learning disability. But now the public schools, because of No Child Left Behind, we're going toward the prevention model. And this is actually kind of what we've been using in adult education all along, because there wasn't funds to go get an adult learner, or even access to testing. We just didn't matter whether they had a learning disability or not. We were going to teach that adult and do the best that we could for that adult. So now we're using what's called a prevention model in the public schools because of No Child Left Behind, which is actually what we've been doing in adult learning for quite a while. Isn't it nice to know we were ahead of the time? So how do we use a prevention model? We look at levels of intervention. We look at teaching a concept of self-determination to empower our adult learners. And we look at using explicit instruction and learning strategies. These are the things that will help us meet the needs of diverse learners, whether they have a learning disability, a learning difficulty, or a learning preference. And that's the key. Okay. So let's see how to start doing that. Anyone have a question? I don't see a hand raised, so I'm moving on. Let's look here. First, let's take a look at those learning preferences. As we discussed before, they happen to all populations, right? And if we have high quality instruction, we're going to meet the needs of all the people that we serve. If we have people with learning difficulties, here again, we are going to do what we can to overcome the circumstances or the specific tasks they're having trouble on by focusing on those specific tasks and maybe seeing where the gaps were in their education, those circumstances, and then we'll be able to take care of that adult learner's difficulty by having that targeted and specific instruction, where we're looking at exactly, for example, which phonetic sounds they don't have a hold on, which letter words do they not, what vocabulary do they need. We're having targeted and specific instruction. Do they need job skills versus literature skills? And then lastly, we look at students who have learning disabilities, who truly do have a learning disability, which means this legal term protects them because that adult is not going to be able to learn that skill. If this adult truly, you've done your learning preferences, you've done your learning difficulties, and you've done those interventions, and they still continue to have that trouble, then you might speculate that they have learning disabilities, but it doesn't matter with your instruction, because if they cannot learn to do a particular task, what we do is we start looking at those kinds of things that might help them to compensate for that disability. We're going to look at intensive specific instruction, and we're going to make it very individualized. As for I have a question there about the slides going to be available. I'll talk with Yari about that, if there's a way to post them or to send them to you. Okay, Grace? Okay, so now any questions about what we've covered so far? All right. Now, let's look at that first thing that I talked about. Let's talk about self-determination factors first. We're going to do a little activity. Oh, I see Yari says we're going to post it on the blog. Oh, that's great. Thanks, Yari. Now we're going to get ready to do an activity. Make sure you have a piece of paper and a pencil in front of you, something to write with, okay? Some people have access to sticky notes. If that works for you, that's fine. What I want you to do is look at these 6 factors, okay? Some of them are very self-explanatory. So, I don't need to spend a great deal of time, telling you what everything is, but I do want to key you into a couple of different things, okay? Make sure when you think of environment here, that you're thinking about how adults can adjust their own environment, okay, to make it more conducive to their learning, okay? So here's what I want you to do for your activity. You've got your pencil and paper there. Okay. I'm going to set the timer in just a minute and give you 2 minutes. And what I want you to do is think of these 6, okay, and how you would sequence them if you were going to do a lesson for an adult learner to teach that adult learner about self-determination. Okay? Because you can improve an adult's learning if they have self-determination. So, you can doodle, you can use your sticky notes, but I want you to get an idea of how you think these 6 components, which ones do you teach first, which ones are related. So, I'm going to set the timer and give you about 2 minutes. If you have a question, post that, or I'll set the microphone down in case all of you have the same questions. I'm going to give you 2 minutes. I'm struggling with the counter here, but I'll have it in just a moment. There you go. We're ready. If you have a question, post it there for me. So we've got 1 more minute. See how your ideas are flowing there. What you think one leads to the other. Whenever you're ready, start posting in the chat area how you think these 6 relate to each other. Okay, let's start sharing. If you would like to discuss yours and you have a mic available, raise your hand and I'll put the mic down and give you a chance to explain. Or else type into the chat area how you think these would be related. Interesting, Elizabeth. Yeah, you got a great idea there. See, now we've got, I'm seeing a trend here that get awareness, okay, coming first, value yourself. Ah, Jenny, 2 cycles. Value self-awareness, being proactive, plan change, okay. Jacqueline, you're right, value yourself, then everything comes together, okay, that's a good idea. Who else out there has some ideas? David, Diana, Grace? Ah, learning self-awareness has to come first, you think? Verna and Loretta, what do you think? How about you, Marie? When I did this activity, I would give everybody a big sheet of one of those giant sticky notes, and they had 3x5 cards and markers and all these materials. And we would, thanks, keep posting. They would spend a few minutes in small groups, and there were such wonderful and rich discussions on what would come first and how you would teach this. And I want you to know, I got these wonderful visual representations, which I'm going to work with Yari to see how I can also post them, maybe by taking a photograph. For example, I had one person make this giant quilt, and it looked like a quilt representation, and all these 6 were the quilt pieces because they were all connected and sewn together where they were touching. Okay. Also, I had one person actually draw kind of like a picture of a bicycle, and they were saying that the body of the bicycle was that awareness, the environment was the steering wheel, okay? I mean, they had the wheels as being here that value yourself and gain self-awareness. It really was a wonderful, I see all kinds of ideas cultivating. I even had some people, kind of use a picture of a face, or the whole body. And there were some great representations of how these 6 concepts could be very valuable to an adult learner. Okay. I want to show you what the Learning to Achieve model, because that's what these modules all come from, the Learning to Achieve program by links. This is what the Learning to Achieve saw as this. And you're absolutely right there. Being aware of the environment really does affect what's happening, absolutely. Let's take a look here. What they thought is, and I can see where they're coming from, they thought that see how that gaining self-awareness and learning to value yourself were like the roots, those are your foundation, for learning who you are and gaining control of your life and gaining control of a learning environment. And sometimes adults who haven't learned when they're younger is because they were in an environment where they didn't feel empowered. And when they didn't learn like everyone else learned, what they did is learn to be quiet or learn to misbehave. And so, but the end result is they didn't learn things that they could have learned if they, exactly what someone mentioned, if they had been able to figure out how to control their own environment so that they made learning happen. They ask people something as simplistic as, for example, if you're working with a left-handed adult, you should be sitting on that adult's right side, because if he or she is writing on the paper with their left hand and you're sitting on their left side, you're trying to look over their hand or trying to move their hand so you can see what they're writing. Just asking, do they want you on the left or the right, or would they prefer you sitting across from them? That's where good teachers learn to read and write upside down almost. But that gaining control of that learning environment. And then look how the Learning to Achieve model stacks on top of there those important qualities of planning, right? Because adults who don't know how to plan, how do they figure out what they want to learn? How do they figure out what to do next? If they don't learn to be proactive and really that they can be in charge of their own learning, they don't learn to do that. And so what happens is their learning actually gets stilted even more. The other thing is, and here is a real biggie, how many times do you see an adult who wants to learn something, but they're not able to learn it quickly and easily, and so they get very frustrated, and what do? They give up because they cannot reflect and readjust. They want to write the whole essay at one sitting and it be correct the first time they put it on the page. Every single word spelled right the very first time. How many of you have seen a learner like that? They don't know how to do self-evaluation. So part of what we're going to do, and one of the strategies that we're going to talk about in a few minutes, is learn how to do that, reflect and adjust, okay? This is a really cool concept, and when we encourage, even whether you're the adult tutor who's working directly with the adult learner, or whether you're a program manager, if we can get our volunteers to work with adults so that it's a collaborative learning environment and not, I am the teacher, here's what I'm telling you to do or what I'm asking you to do, but really put the adult learner in charge. What do you want me to help you learn? It really makes them become a very self-determined adult, not only in the education setting, but then that bleeds over and they use it in their work setting, they use it in their personal setting, they use it with their children or their spouse. It really makes a difference. So self-determination is probably one of the first things that you should work with with your adult students to help them learn whether they have a learning disability, a learning difficulty, or just a learning preference. This helps them learn what their learning preferences are, what their learning differences are, and that it's okay to have those. They can still be successful adults. Okay, any questions about this? Raise your hand. If you'd like to join the conversation and you have a mic, don't hesitate to raise your hand or post a question. I'll be glad to do that. Take care of that. Let's look on at when, as educators or people who want to teach or help adults, we're all about teaching them strategies so that they can learn, this material. We all know about graphic organizers, and if you don't, make sure you look that up. Graphic organizers, or how to outline, or how to highlight. We give them all these strategies for learning, but here's something that we sometimes forget. We forget in the strategy to teach them how to monitor their performance during the task, okay? How to stop and reflect about whether whatever their learning is heading in the right direction. Is it meeting their needs? Sometimes what they do is we teach them how to plan and we teach them how to perform the task, but they can't monitor their progress. And so what they give you is what they think is a completed progress thing, but they're depending on you to tell them whether their product is complete or not. They have no way to monitor their own performance. And that leads us to that second one. You know, they also have no way to evaluate their own performance. Have you ever had an adult learner give you a product, a piece of work, a writing, and math problems that they've done, and they have absolutely no idea whether they were right or wrong? They have no feeling. They don't know how to evaluate what they have given you. So make sure when you're teaching your students, your adult students, a strategy, also make sure that you give them ideas on how they can monitor their own performance and also how they can evaluate it. And we're going to talk about in the next slide or two about ways to model how you monitor your own progress and how you, as an adult learner, also monitor and evaluate your own product and your own progress. Any questions about that? Please raise your hand. You're a quiet bunch. Yeah. Let's just talk about this reading, for example, the strategy about reading. These all come from the Learning to Achieve modules, which are an excellent program of 8 modules. If you haven't had the opportunity to partake of them, I hope you do in the future. They're wonderful models prepared by the links. Let's look at reading comprehension visualization. I am always simply amazed at when I work with adolescent and adult learners who do not visualize. They don't have that little video or audio tape going in their brain like those of us who are good readers that are actually building like a little movie in our mind. They don't know how to do that. How do you teach them what's going on in your mind so that they can do a similar action in their own mind? Sometimes what we have to do is we have to talk out loud. We have to tell them exactly. Let me give you a quick example. I was working with a group of adolescents, and I was reading parts of Gary Paulson's book called The Hatchet. And I was reading the part, in case you're not familiar, it's a young man, and he goes to Canada to visit his father after his parents recently separated. The plane he's riding, which is a small plane, crashes, and he ends up alone in the wilderness. Well, the plane actually crashes into, the pilot has a heart attack, and he crashes into a pond. When I was reading that story to them, I stopped for a moment and I said, this pond sounds so much like a pond where I used to go to when I was a little girl. When I was a young girl, I would go walking in the woods. And I actually had an adolescent say to me, you lived in Canada? And I said, no, I was born and raised in Indiana. He said, I thought this story was in Canada. I said, it is. He goes, I don't understand how this, I said, I'm using the pond that I remember from my childhood. And since I've not been to a pond in Canada, I'm imagining or guessing that my pond looks like, in my head from Indiana, looks like the one in Canada that this young man crashed into. And he said, the young man in my classroom said, you can do that? And I said, yes. And you can do that, meaning he can do that. He didn't realize that should be doing that. That's why when you get that person who reads fluently, can say all the words, but they get to the bottom of the page and you say, what have you read? And they haven't got the vaguest idea, it's because they haven't been running those videotapes. So you have to stop and let them see by talking out loud how you visualize to help them be a better reader. If they have learning preferences, learning difficulties, or learning disabilities, they still will become stronger readers and understand how the printed words on the page make something happen in our head other than just that hard work of sounding out words, because to them, some of them, reading has been focused, because they struggle to read, reading has been focused all about the phonics, all about the decoding, all about vocabulary, instead of about building the story. So I wanted you to think about that. Oh, I've got a hand up. What's your question? I'm going to give you the mic. Can you tell your question out loud, or can you type it in the chat box, please? Okay, Laura, I see your hand up, but I don't know what your question is. You can type it here in the chat box. Or else I'll be glad to give the microphone to you if you've got the ability to speak to us.
Betsy, this is Yari with FLC. Are you still there?
Oh, yes I am. I'm sorry, I had the microphone down. I had put it down for them to take it. I apologize. I apologize. You're absolutely right, Marie. In second language students, it can be them not understanding the words. So describing things, using video clips, using other things can really make a lot of difference. Let's look at this in explicit instruction model now. Marie, do you have a question? Okay, if you're finished with your question, put your hand down so I know, or I'll be glad to address the questioners if you can put it in the box. Okay, let's take a look at this explicit instruction overview. Oh, thanks, Marie. Okay, let's look at how, if you can do clear explanations using manipulatives, using pictures, using anything that you have to model I do, we do, you do. Take a look at how this changes the dynamic between the teacher and the student. If we look at it here, the teacher is in charge. What the student is doing is watching you do something as you're thinking out loud, okay, as you're modeling it, whether it's solving a math problem, whether it's reading a piece of text, whether it's constructing a sentence, whether it's filling out a job application. While you're modeling that and doing that, you're going to give explicit instruction, but you're also going to tell the student what's going on in your mind. For example, they see you filling out, you say, we're going to fill out a job application. Let's put our work history. So what is work history is? You're there filling it out and you immediately think my first job was, my second job was. They don't know how to come up with that information. So what you need to do is actually model how you think back. Now wait a minute, when did I start working there? Was that when, and start thinking about how the age of your children, what helps you date that job, okay? Give it a date. What you're doing is actually showing them orally or with pictures what's going on in your mind. When you do that and they get the idea of it, then you can move to the second phase. This is the we do, where you're doing a collaborative effort. And notice that the teacher and the student are equally weighted here. Oh, I see. It's because yes, visual aids are great. Absolutely. Back to our model of we do. If it's a collaborative effort between the student and you, then you can see that the adult learner can see what you're doing and actually work with you to be equal collaborative partners. For example, let's write a sentence together. I'll start it and have you put an end to it. And you actually tell them how you start, how you think of different sentence starters, like once upon a time or one day last week, and then how they could fill it in, and they fill in the end of it. It helps them to see how you think to construct a sentence. Then once you've become proficient at that, then you can move to the you do, where the teacher takes a back seat and lets the student be the driver, okay, and show how he or she is thinking out loud. Once you know how they're thinking out loud, the really good news is that then that allows you to see where maybe there are some flaws or some breaks in their thinking pattern or their visualization, so you can help clean this up. Let me give you one example. I had a student that was working really hard to learn like multiplication tables, for example, and we would go through the process of what multiplying means, how multiplying is different from adding, subtracting, or dividing. And she would do very well with me. But then when I had to give her the timed multiplication test where we only have, like 50 problems on a page and they're just like 6 times 8 and 2 times 4, and the person has to see how quickly they can go down through all of those math problems, she couldn't get them. She just was like kept getting stuck over and over again. But when we would be away from that test and doing the manipulatives, she would get the answers right all the time, and I couldn't figure it out. So I asked her one time to think out loud for me and to tell me what the problem was, so I could see what was going on in her mind. What she actually said to me was, here, 2 times 6. 6 what? What are we talking about here? What is the 6? Because I had used manipulatives with her and gone over 2 times 6 squares, or here squares, or whatever the shape was, she was stuck not on what 2 times 6 was 12, but on worrying what 6 items. So there was a block in her learning because I had used manipulatives. So that's where when we get to the you do stage, you can really pinpoint some excellent things and breaks where the student is learning. Okay. Jackson, can you put your hand down unless you have a question? Do you have another question? I see somebody else has a question. Please type it in the box or I'll give you the mic. You are absolutely right, Marie. That is perfect. Yes, using all kinds of gestures, pointing, but also if we get them to do that when they're explaining what's going on in their heads, that really helps us so that we can problem solve where their breaks in understanding are, okay? We're going to move on from explicit instruction unless someone else has a question. Thanks. Thanks, Jackson, for putting your hand down. I appreciate that. If you have a question, I'll be glad to answer it. Type it in the box. All right. When we use those explicit instructions, we tell them exactly how to do something. For example, sometimes we do something automatically and we don't realize we really truly need to explain specifically every single step. Every single step. And that takes planning ahead. It really takes being ready with examples, being ready to teach a lesson, and thinking about, before you get in front of the student, exactly how you would break down every single thing that you do in your head to learn a task. For example, multiplying, filling out a job application, writing a sentence, all of those things. And don't forget, how to monitor progress and how to evaluate. For example, When you write a complete sentence, you check to make sure it's complete by starting with a capital letter, ending with a period, making sure we have a subject and a verb, and that the subject and verb agrees. If we model that out loud and actually check a sentence in front of them, then students learn that pattern. And when we ask them later then, instead of you just marking their sentence wrong, we say, go through the pattern. Do you have a capital letter? Do you have a period at the end? Do you have a subject and a verb? And are they in agreement? This helps them to learn to self-evaluate, because that's the biggie too. They've got to be able to monitor their own progress. Any questions? Right, let's keep moving. Now we're ready to kind of sum up here all the things that we've talked about. When we have our second language learners and our adults with disabilities, whether they're documented or not, whether we just suspect there is a disability, we know that there's some kind of learning preference there or some kind of learning difficulty. When we use these explicit instructions, okay, and we're very careful about how we use them. When we use these, that makes it where we can overcome whether they have the second language issue, whether they have a learning disabilities issue. That model of self-determination empowers them to talk to us, to tell us, yes, and you're rightly, having a checklist for them helps them to learn the process, okay? And also, when you teach them self-determinationally, what happens is they don't just do that process when they're with you. They learn to do that process when they're away from you, because they're in charge of their own environment, because they know how to plan, because they know how to reflect and readjust. Okay? And what helps us do that for them is making sure that they know how to use those strategies that we have explicitly taught them. There are wonderful handbooks on nothing but graphic organizers. There's wonderful manipulatives, access to pictures, movies, video clips, all these wonderful things. But what we have to do is make sure that we are doing that I do, we do, you do model of modeling, so that our adult learners become much more important in the learning process than we, the teacher. Okay? I'd like to have some questions. If you have any questions, I want to make sure we've got plenty of time before we end the session for any questions you'd like for me to address. So the floor is open. I'll put the mic down if somebody has a question, or type it in the box. Okay, I see people might be typing, or it might be just to have a quiet audience. The key thing here is, if you want more information about these, I've given you the website for the Learning to Achieve modules. You also have the opportunity to do one of the online modules for second language learners. There are 2 other online modules about accommodations and about the neuroscience of learning disabilities. And so perhaps in the future you can request to have access to those. Also, if there is an opportunity for you to attend any of the Learning to Achieve sessions so that you get the full modules, that would also benefit you to have more than just a quick review that these are. A lot more details about explicit instruction, a whole module on self-determination, as well as a whole module on accommodations. If you have any questions that you'd like to address me particularly, I see your question, Elvis, and I'll be right to that. You can contact me at the numbers, at the information listed at the bottom of the slide. Okay, so Elvis wants to know, how can we get the student to become proactive and not so passive? Well, I'm thinking the key to that is when you're teaching that self-determination module, you know, that model of self-determination, it's really valuing themselves and them becoming more self-aware and self-valuing. That is the key, Alice. Sometimes our adult learners have such a feeling that they cannot achieve or have not achieved like others. And also, they have this feeling that things come so easily to us, the teachers or the tutors, and they have struggled with it, and they have a feeling that it comes from being, you know, that they're not smart enough. What they don't realize is they weren't with us when we struggled to learn to do something. So they don't see that. When an adult learner understands that he has skills, that he has abilities that I as a teacher might not have. Once he learns to value those, then he does have a better he doesn't have such a problem with self-esteem or with not being proactive. He has to be confident that when he's proactive, he will be successful and that people will accept him being proactive. Any other questions? Okay, I've got a hand up. I'm going to put the mic down if you can talk, or I'll be glad. Oh, Wynn, you've got a great question there. What can we do for a person not to be so in the passive role? And I think when you use that I do, we do, you do model, and you also tell them what's coming, you explain the model. I'm going to do this task first, and show you how to do it. Then we're going to do it together, so that we can collaboratively do different parts. I'll do a part, you'll do a part, and they see that their part is just as correct as your part. And then you get to that you do model where they're doing it alone and you're taking that back seat. It really makes a difference. I have found that when I just show them the 6 components and we have a discussion about the 6 components, they don't understand sometimes how it takes all of those things to accomplish something. And if we show them, here again, that model to go by, it actually helps them to be more proactive. Because, for example, they can gain self-confidence because they have planned ahead. They have reflected and readjusted before they did whatever the thing is that they're going to do. Does that make sense to you, Elvis? Any other questions? In case you're typing or thinking right now, I'm going to go ahead and remind you of something that the Florida Literacy Coalition asked me to do. Oh, we may have a question. Yes, you're absolutely right. Learning styles, multiple intelligence, yes, perfect way to put those right into those 6 concepts. Oh, I see that, Grace. They're so proactive they don't wait for you. Here again, when you're teaching them I do, we do, you do model, you're asking them to back up and do it in sync with you in that process. See if that helps. Ah, you missed the 6 components? Let me zip back to those just for a moment for you to take a look. There are those 6 components for you, Rosie, okay? Ah, Marie, that English as a second language from being passive to active. Here again, I sound like a broken wheel. That when you teach them that the model you teach in is I do, we do, you do, they know coming down the pike is they're going to see how to do it. Then they're going to do this thing, write a sentence, write an essay, fill out a job application, pronounce these words, whatever it is, do these math problems. They're going to see you do it. Then you're going to do it with them in conjunction, and then you're going to move on to them doing it by themselves is what really helps. Okay, let's see, can we obtain the websites from you? Oh, yes, on that last slide, I'm going to advance back to that last slide again. Here is the Learning to Achieve website. It's the one that's right down here. This Learning to Achieve website will give you access to some of the modules, and it will also give you overviews to the modules. These are being offered in different literacy programs. I've done a couple of 4, 5, or 6 sessions throughout the state. Okay. So hopefully you'll be able to sit in for the whole module sometimes. And you're absolutely right, too. That repetition helps them learn how to use the model. Now, Jenny, what you're saying there, you're right. This is very different from other cultures. We have to let them know that the way we teach is where, and especially in adult education, that it's not always the teacher in control and the teacher deciding every element. That what in adult education, often we are student-driven and student-centered. It's what the student wants to learn, right? Yes. And you're absolutely right, that you can model mistakes. Let them see you make an error, but also, too, make sure that you have done your planning. So when you make an error, you do it purposefully so they can see you making an error and also see how you go through your self-correction process. All right? Yes, there's nothing wrong with them seeing that you are not perfect as a teacher. I often, when I'm writing on the board, I ask my students to help me, because when I'm writing on the board, sometimes I will leave out a letter in a word. And please, if they see me doing that, please help me to correct my spelling. It lets them see that we are two human adults trying to help each other. I just might have some knowledge that they're trying to gain, okay? Leah. Yes, I see. ESL students, you are absolutely right. And also, too, sometimes, especially if we have adult learners who have gone through part of public schooling here, as maybe they came in country as adolescents, or were always kind of put into special education classes in environments where there were other students who had greater or different kinds of needs. They learned to be quiet and to be cooperative, and so sometimes we have to tell them that adult education is different. Adult education is a collaborative effort. You're also right about that. Awareness and value of self can lead more. You are absolutely right, Janet. That is perfect. We have to tell them, what do you want me to teach you? Because I have all kinds of things that we can work on. What do you want? Putting them in the driver's seat really, really makes a difference. And sometimes we have to teach them that role, because the adult learner has not been successful in school, or maybe has not had access to school, or has had access in a different culture or a different educational environment. I teach developmental education at the community college level, and I am continually surprised by the adults who will come up and ask me if they can have, like say for example, extra time for an assignment, and they're so apologetic, like it's bothering me, like it's disrupting my education. And they also, many times, are so afraid to ask me for extra time. And I say, well, of course. How much time do you need? They are so surprised by that. That we can give them the time that they need, because this is adult education. Okay, they're saying they're going to put the PowerPoints online and link to all the attendees. That's a great idea. Thanks for taking care of that, Yari. I'll make sure you have the PowerPoint to do that. Any other questions for me? Okay, let me do a couple of reminders for you. After this presentation, you're going to receive an email from the Florida Literacy Coalition with an evaluation. Please take a few moments to honestly fill that out for me. It helps me to become a better presenter, and also to learn better how to manage this online format, which is a fairly new way to teach for some learners and for some teachers, me included. And so I want to become better and more proficient. So please, tell me honestly how I can improve the session or my delivery of the session. Also, in about 2 to 4 weeks, you're going to get a second email. That's going to ask you to evaluate your transfer of learning. That means taking what we've done here today, the ideas that I've presented, and actually you've tried to use them with adult learners, and how that has gone for you, whether you've been able to transfer and use that information, and perhaps other more in-depth instruction that you need, or other feedback. And speaking of that, you'll see my contact information here. And if I did not want you to contact me, I would not give you the information. If you go back to your adult learners and you're trying to implement some of this, or you have a particular case that you're struggling with, don't hesitate to contact me through my email or through my website, findbetsy.com. I'll be glad to correspond with you about specific students, brainstorm ideas, or share different kinds of teaching resources that I have learned. I have been a teacher educator for adults all my whole life. I have never taught children elementary or middle school. I've always taught older adolescents and adults. I often say I'm a reading teacher who's never taught a child to read. I only have taught those adults who did not learn to read and write or be literate in the traditional format of adult learners, or those second language learners who are learning English for the first time. So as an adult educator, that's my whole profession. I've only worked with adults who struggle to learn to read, and my whole dissertation, which is available online at my website, talks about, I captured the stories of adult learners who had, how they had been successful, and those compensatory strategies that they used to be successful adults in spite of their non or limited reading status. So any questions or anything that I can answer further, don't hesitate to type them in right now. I'm here with you until 1:30, or to contact me individually. I'll be glad to do that, to converse with you that way as well. I'm going to put the mic down in case anyone has a question. I'd like to know if you have any ideas, if you're already thinking about ideas of how you're going to use this information, or for a particular student, I'd like to know about it. Okay, Jacqueline, I see that. What is the best way to teach and help an adult student to read whose second language is English? Whoa, now that's a really interesting way. I've found that sometimes it's according to the literacy level of the adult in his or her own native language. If the adult is literate in their native language and they have a book, say in Spanish or in Chinese, if I can get that same book translated into English, that really helps them a lot to correspond one word to the other using something they already know. The other thing that I have done, which I think is a really kind of an interesting little thing to do, is I have them write a note or a letter, like say to a loved one, a child, their spouse, somebody, and then we translated that. They wrote it first in their native language, if they were literate in their native language, and then we translated it into English so that they had applicable skills and they began to use the English as a second language. Because otherwise, sometimes what we do is we start with a set of vocabulary, but the person is trying to find a place to use those words. So I kind of liked that. I hope that answered your question, Jacqueline. But thank you too, Grace. Lee, let's see. You are absolutely right on that. Sometimes the adult learners have that model of deference to the teacher so ingrained in them, it takes a lot of work to actually have them come out of that and see us as collaborative partners in their learning. And you're right, they will actually strive so much sometimes. I've had them that they don't want to turn in anything until they absolutely know it's perfect, when they don't understand the point of my working with them is to help them move toward whatever perfection is. They think I have to see it perfectly instead of being in on the building process. And that's a little tricky to get across to them. You're right. Starting with phonics can be one thing to do with English language learners, but making those phonics about words that are applicable to their lives and what they want to learn will really, really help a lot. Okay. You're most welcome, Rosie. I'm glad to do that for you. I teach, Lee, your question, I have taught English as a second language in a vocational and technical school. I also at the community college where I teach the students, I have what's called a fully seated developmental reading class. The other developmental reading class are hybrid where they're online part of the time and in class part of the time. And so the second language learners are usually put into my seated class. So I have the ones who are somewhat proficient in English but not really ready for college level work come into my developmental, and I teach 2 levels of developmental reading. So I have a lot of experience with second language learners. You're welcome for the website information. That's great. There's several. That Learning to Achieve site has a lot of great information. Marisa, you're an ESOL tutor? Yes, I've tutored one-on-one with ESOL students as well as working with groups of students. I one time in my classroom had 15 different languages represented at the same time, not only multiple Spanish, because let's think one Spanish is the same all over, and it's definitely not. Multiple different kinds of Spanish language students from different countries, different dialects. And then I also even had Russian and Japanese all in the same room, as well as Portuguese. So it was quite a room. Grace, thank you as well. Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed the presentation. Lynn, let me know how it works. If you try to do one of these things and doesn't quite work, we have to reflect and reevaluate too if we want to be empowered adult learners. So don't hesitate to give me a call or give me an email message. I'll be glad to correspond with you to kind of look at what went wrong, look at what went right, and how to improve the delivery. I'm glad, Ms. Jackson, that it's good for you, because you are right. If we can start with some of those younger children and get them empowered, they grow into adults and they're going to be so strong and in charge of themselves. And it works at work, and it's a wonderful tool to teach adult learners who have children at home, because they go home and teach their children these 6 lessons about self-empowerment and self-direction, and we have the next generation of more informed and stronger learners. Thank you, Diane. I appreciate you being with us. Yes, Jenny, that's scaffolding, right, and that's where that I do, we do, you do comes in. You're absolutely right. Encouraging them to visualize, and if they can draw or find a representation of what they see in their head, that's also important too, because sometimes they can't express what it is that's going on in their heads. So if we give them picture dictionaries, access to to things to help them be able to express what's going on in their individual mind, then we can sometimes help to self-correct that if we see a flaw. You're very welcome, Jacqueline. Thank you so much. All right, Yari, I'll take care of that. Now they're hearing on different sounds and accents. Albus, you are correct. Sometimes we have to also understand that auditory learners learn very strongly through that modality, and they may be better and stronger at picking up the differences between, for example, an aspirated F and a fricative V. The F is with the air, and the V is a vibration. Some with auditory, but if their strong point is not auditory learning, and if they actually have a learning disability in auditory processing, they are not going to be able to pick up those phonic skills. And we actually have to let them see our mouths and tongues and where we place them, and really have them kind of tune in on what those differences are, especially like the F and the V. My favorite is, have you ever had an adult student that uses the word of, O-F, instead of the word have, H-A-V, that they said, I would have gone? But if you think about it, pronounce the word of. The F instead of the fricative, we actually do it in the aspirated. We use that fricative V sound in the word of, and that's why they actually write it O-F. Plus, in that Spanish language, sometimes those H sounds don't have any sound at all, so that's where they get that air, that have, and so that's why they substitute the word of for the word have. Absolutely use their language, Marie, to translate. Absolutely. That's one of the biggest things. I wish that I was bilingual in all the languages, multilingual in all the languages of the students I taught, because it would be so much easier to teach them if I knew their native language so that I could translate for them. But yes, and here's that key too. When you're teaching a second language student content material like science, like science or math, you should be teaching them, if we can, in their native language, and then using the English to structure them learning to be able to do it in English. It's a very tricky thing to teach content in a non-native language and expect them to learn not only that content material, say for example, processes or scientific formulas or the name of all the states, when they're learning content at the same time they're learning English language. Okay, it would kind of be like my teaching you. Think of a young child. You're teaching them to stand on their feet, and let's go ahead and teach them ballet at the same time. No. You teach them to stand on their feet first. Once they get solid on their feet, then let's go into the ballet. But when we teach content in second language English at the same time, we're really overwhelming them. Yes, and you are absolutely right, Marie, that it is sometimes a great disadvantage for them. Elvis, listening, yes. Sometimes they have to be taught how to specifically listen. Also, too, some cultures, remember, they cast their eyes down. They don't look at the face of the person who is speaking, because that's seen as intrusive, invasive, or disrespectful. We have to teach them it's okay to look at our mouths, to look at how we're sounding things out so that they can see those letters when they can't hear them. Okay, Rosie, you want to know where you can begin to volunteer to help tutors? The Florida Literacy Coalition, I'm sure that Yari Payne can direct you to a center close to where you live. That would be excellent. If we would love to have a Spanish-speaking. The more we can have the Spanish-speaking tutors, the better we are. And I'm sure that there are many, even in your local area, through the public library. Sometimes the adult literacy program in your area would love to have you. Hey Jenny, yeah, give me your, yes, you are absolutely right. Using a mirror so that they can see, standing side by side in a mirror, so they're not actually they're looking at you, but looking at you in the mirror, and then matching is good, but you do have to watch that left-right stuff, but they can see. Also, too, giving them actual permission to see where the placement of your tongue and your lips are, and show the difference, for example, between the F and the V, I go back to that again, is really, really important. But you almost have to, for some students, especially second language learners, give them permission to look at you that closely, okay? Okay, I'm just on the, Ms. Jackson, I'm just on the questions, discussions, and resources slide. We're just bouncing off the questions. You are right, Marie. If we can teach them content in their native language, for example, an explanation of we're going to learn to all the 50 states, or we're going to learn about the United States government. If you can teach them that explanation in their own native language, and then explain how our government system works with the Congress, the Senate, the House, that in their own native language, and then transfer that, once they have that information and they understand, for example, the Congress, the Senate, the House, they understand the structure in their native language, then we teach them that in the English, the English counter words, so they know that in their native language and in the English language. That would be the primo. That would be just wonderful instruction. Yes, teaching phonics does help with pronunciation and listening. You're absolutely right, Janet. But one thing, too, is we have to remember that some of our learners have difficulties with that auditory processing. So we have to really fine-tune which letters they're having and which phonics sound, their letter blends, whatever they're having trouble with, and fine-tune and just give those lessons to help fine-tune, especially if those sounds we're asking them to create or to make are not in their native language. For example, the letter R, or in Asian languages, there are letters that are sounds that are not available or not used in other languages. You're most welcome, Rosie. Okay, we're getting down to the end. Thank you, Yari. If anyone has any questions, don't hesitate to contact me afterward. It's been a pleasure to be with you this afternoon, and I hope to have the opportunity to meet all of you either in a Learning to Achieve session or again online in the future, or at the Florida Literacy Conference later in the year. Thank you, Marie. That would be great. I am going to be at the conference later in the spring, so I'm looking forward to attending the conference and hopefully participating too. Thank you, Alice. It's good to have you with me. Yep, Marilyn, thank you. Hope to see you at the conference in the spring. You're welcome, Jacqueline. Thank you. Thanks to you too, Deegan. Yeah, that'll be great to present those sessions. I'm looking forward to being a part of the Florida Literacy Coalition Conference. It's a wonderful opportunity. Thank you, Rosie. Thank you, Lee. I'm glad I hope you got some good information to use. I did too, Lee. Thank you, Ms. Jackson. I'll be looking forward to seeing you. Okay. Okay, Yari, I'm going to see if I can figure out how to cut off or stop the recording. I appreciate everyone being with me. Rosie,